Well, thank you very much, Hugh. Mesdames et messieurs, merci beaucoup, Hugh, for that kind introduction. And welcome to my hometown of the city of Ottawa. It's great to have the conference here this year and in such good numbers. And we've got a few extra seats in the front if some folks at the back want to come up. This is sort of like my church. No one wants to sit in the front pew here. And we've got a whole bunch of folks. I guess the VIPs are up in the second tier there. So, or they're the heckling crowd, I guess, one or the other. But it's great to be here, and I just wanted to point out you're going to hear from a much more inspiring speaker than I. Glenn Murray, the former mayor of Winnipeg, is here, and I'm very happy to be speaking before Glenn, because a couple of months ago we were both in Thunder Bay, and he spoke before I did, and he got up and he used one of my jokes, and it was a joke, I have to tell you, because we're in Ottawa, and Glenn and I are both former mayors, about a former mayor of the city of Ottawa, who is very well known, the first female mayor of a Canadian city, Charlotte Whitten, who was a real character. She's sort of, I equate her to Hazel McCallion, sort of that character of an individual. And Charlotte was, back in the 1960s, meeting the Lord Mayor of London, and she was all gussied up in her finest dress and had a rose in her lapel, and the Lord Mayor of London was in his Sunday suit, and he had his chain of office on, the gold chain of office. And the Lord Mayor went up to Charlotte and said, "Madam Mayor, if I smell your rose, will you blush?" And without missing a beat, she said, "My Lord Mayor, if I pull your chain, will you flush?" So I'm very glad to take one of Glenn's jokes away from him. But Hugh, thank you for that kind introduction. It reminds me of, you always get these events, you always get some interesting introductions, and I recall the time when I was up in Thunder Bay when Glenn stole one of my lines, and we were at a bear pit session, an accountability session with the Northern Ontario Municipal Association, NOMA. And every year, a couple of ministers go up and they have an accountability session where ministers are up at the front, and individual councillors and reeves and mayors all line up and ask questions. But you have to ask, you have to say who you're addressing the question to. And this was just, to put the timing in perspective, was just after Elliot Spitzer resigned as a result of having an affair. So this woman got up and she was very nervous, you could tell, and she said, "My question is for the Minister of Affairs." And so everyone got a bit of a chuckle out of that, and I said, well, you got to add municipal affairs and housing and that. But it's a pleasure to be here at ONPHA, and I've got to apologize because my very first speech as Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing was at the ONPHA conference last year. I think I'd been in the job about a week, and I accepted Shrad's invitation and Hugh's invitation. And throughout the entire speech, I mispronounced ONPHA, and I kept calling it ONPHA. And so I think in order to get back at me, I picked up the program, and if you look on page 11, they have here, Minister Wilson has been invited to stay on after the opening session. So thank you very much for that. Now, of course, you remember Jim Wilson was the minister in the Conservative government that cut housing, so that was even more salt in my wound, but thank you very much, Shrad, for that. But it reminded me, I was, it's funny, you've got to pronounce things correctly. I was, when I was mayor, I was giving a speech at a high-tech seminar in Ottawa, and when you get busy and you don't always have time to prepare, which was the case with this speech, I just grabbed the speech, someone had written it for me, and I hadn't had a chance to read it over. So I got up and I started going on, and it was on high tech, and I got up and I was reading it sort of verbatim because I wasn't comfortable with the material. And I said, with this mayor, you've got a great supporter of the IT sector. And I kept saying the IT sector, and I hadn't realized it was the IT sector. So anyways, I'm going to try to get ONPHA right this time. But let me just begin by thanking very much the board of directors of ONPHA and all of the volunteers, the member agencies. This is a wonderful gathering of individuals who care passionately about affordable housing in our province and in our communities. And low-income families, single men and women, senior citizens, victims of violence, persons with developmental disabilities, those suffering from mental illness, and those who struggle with homelessness all benefit from nonprofit housing. And I'd like to congratulate ONPHA very much as it celebrates its 20th anniversary. In 2 decades, ONPHA has grown to include more than 770 nonprofit housing providers. And you're benefiting some 400,000 people, and together you're operating more than 150,000 nonprofit units across the province of Ontario. At the end of the day, you're making Ontario a better place. Vous faites de l'Ontario un endroit où il fait bon vivre. Merci beaucoup. And for the first time, I believe ever, as a minister, I'm actually taking delegations this afternoon, similar to what I do at the AMO conference, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference, where I have a number of delegations coming and meeting with me. And I was thinking, you know, in about 20 years from now, the new Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing will be sitting around saying, who the hell started these delegations that I've got all weekend long? And they'll look back and they'll say, that was Jim Watson. But it was the right thing to do, because I think, well, this is more of a monologue. I'm more interested in dialogue, and that's what the delegations are all about. As I mentioned to you, I spoke to your annual conference last year, and I'd just been appointed the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing by Premier McGuinty. And during the past year, I've toured the province and seen firsthand the fundamental importance and the impact of adequate, affordable housing in community after community. In January, I met with a group of tenants at a housing project in Kingston. I listened to one gentleman tell me how he had been a carpenter with a wife and a young child. He told me how he had lost both of them, and with them, his will to live. He had been homeless in Kingston for 9 years. But because of that small supportive housing project, he now had a place to live. More than that, he had a reason to live. He used his carpentry skills to make minor repairs for his neighbors. He helped with group dinners, and he was working on his resume. Here is a man who was off the street and getting back on his feet because of housing. This sort of story is what makes communities stronger. I don't have to tell you that. Kids stay in the same schools, neighbors get to know each other, communities are formed. Access to safe, affordable home has made a huge difference in his life and the lives of his neighbors. And here is a guy who was given housing and is returning much more back to his community. Here are a few words from another tenant whose life was transformed when she received affordable housing.
I had a drug and alcohol problem, and I came up to St. Catharines 9 years ago, hoping to make a better life for myself. And I got in with the right people. I couldn't read and write when I came to St. Catharines. I went to school in 2003, got my grade 12, and you can't get me away from books now.
That is why housing is a priority for our government. And as I look back on my first year as minister, I think we've taken some solid steps. And as always, I think there's obviously room for improvement. During the past year, we've continued to fund the construction of new affordable housing under the Canada-Ontario Affordable Housing Program. And working together, we've created 15,000 new units of affordable housing for low-income households, victims of domestic violence, and people with mental illness. Affordable housing for people like Teresa, who has found friends and the support she needs to thrive in her new home. Teresa says her home isn't just an address. She says it's a place she's proud of because it gives her the wonderful feeling of being safe. And people like Ben, who immigrated from Zimbabwe and moved from place to place until he recently found Genesis Court in Niagara. At Genesis Court, Ben not only found a safe, affordable place to live, but he found a peaceful spot to plant a garden and grow tomatoes and kale to share with his new neighbors. And it's not just new housing. We are providing housing allowances for up to 5,000 lower-income families. Families like Tanya and her daughter Isabel, who need a hand with their housing costs. And Ken, who lives independently with support from community organizations. These are the people who benefit from your dedication and our continued support.